Welcome, everybody, to the University Interdisciplinary Colloquium for the 29th of January. This is the first colloquium that we are holding in the spring semester, so we're pleased to have you join us. We have with us today Dr. Pilar Horner to provide the presentation and lead the Q&A. Before I introduce Dr. Horner, I would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize Michigan's 12 federally recognized Native nations, historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. If you're interested in learning more about this, there's a page curated by the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program, and I'll put a link to that page in the chat here in just a bit. For those of you who are new, the University Interdisciplinary Colloquium is a forum. It is organized by the Center for Interdisciplinary, which I direct. I'm Michael O'Rourke, and sponsored by the College of Arts and Letters, that highlights the innovative and important interdisciplinary work involving artistic and humanistic perspectives at Michigan State. Often interdisciplinary is used almost as a code word for well-funded scientific research, not to denigrate that kind of research at all, but interdisciplinarity isn't restricted to the sciences. It is often achieved in a very innovative and interesting way by artists and humanists in combination with one another and in combination with scientists. The UIC is an attempt to acknowledge and amplify interdisciplinary contributions that feature aesthetic and humanistic elements. We meet every other week during the fall and spring semesters, and our slate this semester, as last semester, will be on Zoom. So please, if you enjoy the presentation today, consider coming back and joining us for the 5 remaining UIC presentations in the spring. The next one will be in 2 weeks on the 12th of February, also noon to 1 Eastern Time on Zoom. Anne Felina White, as Associate Professor of Theater Studies and Directing and Head of Theater Studies in the Department of Theater, will be here to deliver a presentation entitled Acting and Its Others, Labor's Role in Defining Artistic Boundaries. So that's in 2 weeks. Today, though, as I mentioned, we have Dr. Pilar Horner with us. Dr. Horner is an Associate Professor in the School of Social Work, an affiliated faculty member in Chicano Latino Studies, and an advisory board member with the Institute for Global Health and the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and also an advisory board member with the Diversity Research Network through the Office of Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives. Dr. Horner holds a PhD from the Joint Social Work and Sociology program at the University of Michigan. Her research focuses on how migration impacts health outcomes with Spanish-speaking populations. Her recent work includes looking at resilience factors for individuals and families for vulnerable transnational populations, both in the Dominican Republic and in Puerto Rico. Today, Dr. Horner is with us to deliver a talk entitled Art-Based Inquiry and Social Science Research with Transnational Latino Families. Dr. Horner.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, it's sharing weirdly. Just a minute. Okay. Does that work? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be presenting a little slice of this very experimental work that some colleagues and I have started a couple of years ago. And I'm going to talk a little bit about today, a little bit about the interdisciplinary nature of the work, how it sort of came to be, some of the issues we were having. I'm going to also present on some of the initial results, and then talk about future plans and how we're going to be extending some of this work. I would like to thank the School of Social Work here and the museum, Michigan State Museum, University of Michigan Museum director. He's actually now the former director, Dr. Mark Auslander, who was very helpful in helping us conceptualize some of the artistic parts of the research project. Richard Centeno, who is the director of the Hispanic Family Counseling, he's our partner. We have a community partner in Orlando, Florida. And I also just want to give some acknowledgement to the displaced families who spent their entire day with us. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of time, and we are very grateful for their energy, for their honesty, and for their attention for those days. So I want to talk a little bit about inspiration and how this sort of came to be. I often get this question, so I thought I would just include a little note on it. In 2017, a pretty big hurricane hit Puerto Rico, which most people know about. But the losses have been tremendous, over $90 billion. Over thousands of people have been estimated to have died or attributed to this event. There was widespread flooding, no electricity, lack of fresh water, there were no cell phones, ATMs. FEMA was involved. We had colleagues who in the schools of social work who would send us pictures of their buildings just flooded, and students couldn't go to learn. Everything was just on shutdown. I do want to mention, however, that the recovery did depend a lot on, and the recovery effort is still going on. It's by no means sort of all figured out. But the extent to which recovery happened really was place-based. So in the larger, as you can imagine, the larger metropolitan areas such as San Juan and Ponce, they did receive recovery efforts faster. And more rural areas and some of the areas in the mountains, which we were hoping to go to study, had slower recovery. I kind of talk about this in terms of like a house of cards, because Puerto Rico certainly wasn't, it had a lot of problems prior to the hurricane. And there was serious lack of infrastructure, high corruption, high rates of poverty. There was electrical infrastructure, like in terms of electrical grid issues. There were a lot of things going on. So it was and has been a very vulnerable geographical space, and its inhabitants also share that vulnerability. Just as a side note, because I often get this question, which I find it interesting, but I just want to sort of, people sometimes say, why move? Like, why are you there? Why don't people just leave? And I think that question, it comes up a lot, and I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I do often present the case of the Netherlands. And if you don't know about the Netherlands hydraulic engineering project, I would really suggest you go and Google it or watch a quick YouTube video on it. It is known as one of the 7 modern wonders of the world, and in some ways I do a whole separate talk on policies and how policies are ideologically conceptualized. And so one example I give is how countries that are bounded by large bodies of water, how their geopolitical infrastructure and systems react and protect or don't protect their geographic spaces, and why. And so I often pit what happened in Puerto Rico with what happened in terms of the investment in the Netherlands, just to show that there is a difference between waiting until the disaster has happened to pay out billions of dollars versus investing in on the early side and paying a lot of money, because the hydraulic project was very expensive, but the results are remarkable. I just want to add that because that question comes up a lot, so just wanted to sort of, I'm not going to go too much into that. So the fall of the hurricane inspired a growing diaspora of Puerto Ricans in Orlando, Florida, and actually is the largest diaspora of Puerto Ricans who have moved from the island to the United States mainland. I had started talking, I read an article, I was reading, it was just devastating to read about what the families and children and my colleagues were going through. And I had spoken with my colleague here at Michigan State in the School of Social Work, Daniel Velez Ortiz, and his work has always been with Puerto Rico. He's from Puerto Rico, but his work is mostly with in gerontology and looking at health systems with older Latino populations. But we began to discuss what was going on, and we started to ask some questions about how do we begin conversations that are rooted in trauma, and what are the unique aspects of Latino families in terms of those particular experiences. And I wanted to, because the narrative that I've been hearing so much during the recent administration and then during the Obama administration is that immigration was really a victim-laden language. There's a victim narrative around it, which really has been coinciding or hitting up against my personal experience as a child of immigrants and growing up in an immigrant family, where there was a lot more resilience and attention to the resilient aspects of our culture and identity than what I was hearing in at CNN or Fox. I just wasn't getting the same story as what I had experienced and what other immigrants who I knew at the time had experienced. So we had these ties to Puerto Rico, and we had all these partnerships with art-based political and social action work, and things we started coalescing these conversations, and this is sort of what emerged from all of these conversations. A quick note: I want to talk a little bit about how I understand art in terms of what I'm doing with this work. I really believe that structures of power, that art has the ability to attend to these structures of power and inclusion practices. So from a personal standpoint, my passion for art started very young, like high school theater stuff. But then when I got to college, and post-college, I was able to engage in theater in Michigan prisons. So I worked for over 10 years in Michigan prisons, working with women, inmates, men, and sometimes younger kids to perform improv pieces based on their experiences, but were constructed over time, these theatrical pieces. And then we would present them at the beginning we could present them to the public, but then it sort of got more and more repressive as the years went by, so it was just for the internal prison population and a few of our guests. And so I was able to do theater in prisons. We started some art programs. We started a nationwide, a national event bringing people here to look at art prisoners, the art from Michigan prisoners. And then that translated into me continuing in my Fulbright, and so I received a Fulbright to study underground theater during the military regime in Chile. And that was during the Pinochet regime. And so all of that work was really based on Freire and Boal and art as a liberatory practice to engage silence and disempowered voices. And since the beginnings of that, this has really taken off, the use of arts in this way. So arts-based methods, even drawing, it can undermine power structures, provide more inclusive spaces for research, which is very, in my experience, new. Well, relatively new. And some of the things I like about it is that the drawing, for example, provides participants with more control over the research process. And I really like this aspect of engaging communities, especially vulnerable populations, who feel incredibly disempowered or out of control or have experienced displacement, like the groups we worked with, and having a space where they feel not like I'm just under a microscope again, or I'm doing this other thing that I have no control over, but they feel vested in with their own action. There's a sort of competency embedded in this approach. And it really captures how participants understand their lived experiences. And also it can, and I'm going to get to, you're going to see in the results, it really can capture a depth of emotion and perspective that you can't usually get through other data gathering methods. I'm a qualitative researcher, and I have been doing interviews and focus groups and multi-focus groups for a long time. And this method really, in a unique way, was able to elicit powerful emotions and stories in a short, what I would consider a short amount of time for a qualitative researcher. And so that was very compelling. Researchers have used poetry, theater, and storytelling, photography, drawing, all of these methods, and they've demonstrated that they can be used in conjunction with community activism strategies to empower marginalized and underrepresented groups. I want to say the link to that definitely has occurred in this particular project. So again, I did want to make this shift from Latino families as victims to a strength-based perspective. And I was really interested in theoretically understanding what are the mechanisms by which Latino families are resilient through traumatic or immigrant migration processes. So we started using Walsh's family resilience theory as that kind of undergirded our theoretical work. And this framework, it draws together from numerous studies, and it identifies synthesizing processes in key domains of family functioning. So belief systems, organization patterns, and communication processes. And you're going to see later on when I present some of the results, how in particular the Latino family mediates those particular processes to then come out on the other end as resilient. And so familial resilience in the face of catastrophic events offers new pathways for addressing these outcomes. And so what Danielle and I were talking about is we're always kind of fascinated with this idea of cultural competence with the populations that we care about, in particular Latino families. And even though it is much more widely known in the health field that you have to be attentive to culture in treating patients and their particular experience, that is not, it is there, but we have seen and continue to see this sort of I don't know if it's an incapacity, but a disconnect between what they're taught in school and then how it works out in practice. And for example, just recently, this has been happening. I've been hearing a lot of stories, but also this personally happened to me where my father is very ill, and the doctor says, "Okay, you need this surgery." He needed this surgery, and you need it today, or within the week, because it's very dangerous. And then my father says, "That's very good. I need to talk to my daughter. I need to talk to my other daughter. I need to talk to my son, and then we all need to talk together." And the nurse got really angry at my father, was really angry. And it ended up being such a sore point that they decided to leave that facility altogether. And now we're in a little bit of a mess. But this is exactly where the rubber hits the road. These are the moments that I'm really interested in. We're trained that families are different. We understand that there are cultural differences, but then somehow in these little tiny moments, the key moments of health interventions, we fall short. So moving on, I want to present a little bit about this research. And I have to say, just to put it out there, this was a big risk that we took because I had not known anybody who had done exactly what we did. And we had gotten a small grant, which provided a good substantial amount of money for the families to come and spend the day with us. But, I had 10, 15 years of art-based work, so I knew what the possibility was, but still it was a big risk. And I remember telling my research team, I said, "I just want you to know, I really believe in this process. All the research says this is a possibility. My own experience says it's a possibility, but no one's ever done this. So it's quite possible this whole thing will fail. This could just be a complete failure." And it's quite something to go into a project where you're asking so much of the community and of your partners, and you have this sense of this could work, but you don't know. And so this is kind of what happened. We decided to use an art-based inquiry model that was sort of based in photo voice because I'm really intrigued by photo voice. But what I didn't like about photo voice was the theoretical, there was like a philosophical orientation of the camera's point of view, which can only capture theoretically one point of view. People can co-create the image, but still one person is pressing the button. And that just gnawed at me. And because I wanted to capture the unit of analysis being the Latino family. I didn't want to capture head of household, which is usually how it's measured in the literature, right? They'll talk about Latino families, but then they only interview the head of household. And I was really interested in what is actually the family dynamic. So there's a little bit about art-based inquiry. I'm going to skip over that. But we ended up working, we helped conceptualize this process of a multi-family arts-based focused group day. So we recruited 9 families over 3 days, but it was a long day. So they spent from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. with us. and we recruited from 3 different geographical sites in Orlando, Florida, from Orlando, Kissimmee, and Castleberry. These are all geographical areas within the greater Orlando area. Orlando's more central, and then Kissimmee and Castleberry are on either sides. But the reason we did this was because we found out that certain folks are coming over from those particular comparable geographical areas in Puerto Rico. So even back then we were thinking we're going to study the folks in Orlando, but there's a particular place that people are coming in Puerto Rico to Orlando and in Kissimmee and Castleberry. So that was our rationale behind that. In the morning, we provided a free breakfast. People came in the morning and we did IRB and we talked about informed consent. And then I'm going to show you a little bit about what we did in the morning. And then we had a lunch. And then in the afternoons, we did a group multifamily focus group using the arts projects that we worked on. My methodological approach is always grounded. I always use grounded theory as a particular approach, and the focus groups were all digitally recorded. We used inductive analysis. We did IRR. We did some inter-rater reliability, and with our thematic coding. And the first time around, we had a 42. IRR is really difficult to do with qualitative work. I don't know if anybody has experience with that, but it's tedious. And the first time around, we had a 42% IRR rate. So then we recoded and talked a little bit more. We ended up with 62. And so we landed on a 62% IRR rate. But then we would have conversations with anything that we just needed some tightening on in terms of our overall code book. So by the end of it, we felt very confident that we were all coding these things pretty consistently. All right, so I want to get to a little bit of the fun part, and I have some pictures. I think I'm good with time. Okay, so the morning session, we had all the families there, and we just wanted to get them, doing art. And a lot of them hadn't. Some of them have never done art. And so we gave out these 5x7 cards, and we just said, what are you grateful for? And we had tons of art supplies. And we didn't say anything beyond that. We let them interpret how they were going to create what they were grateful for. So they were to elicit gratitude and put it out into these images. And I don't know if you can see some of them. We have a lot of these cards. I think it could be its own little art project, own little art show. But some of them are of the view down here, like the view of the ocean from their island. Some of them are home. Someone says, "Estoy viva," I'm alive, and each of the fingers is fe is faith, esperanza is hope, amor, love, familia is family, and salud is health. So that she painted a hand. She's like, I'm alive, and then talked about the connected parts of why she felt grateful for her life. Some people talked about religion. Some people drew about music, and you can see in some of these images, there's family already there. So these were really beautiful. And what we ended up doing was we had everyone stand up after we did this, and like in an art show, so they had to take their I don't think I have a piece of paper here. And they went like this, and they said, here's what I did, and they explained it, and we could ask questions. And the reason we did that was it was very intentional. Everything we did was very intentional because we were building to this next thing, which I'm about to talk about. But this was to get them proud of their work, to feel that they were doing something, that they understood what we were getting at, and that they were sort of warming up. It's sort of like the scales if you practice a musical instrument. These are sort of the scales that we were using. Here's some pictures of the folks doing the art projects. Then, after we were done with this initial cards, we put them all on the wall. We got some tape, and they just sort of decorated our space, and they framed our space in this really nice way. Then we started working on these trifolds. So each family received a trifold. These, we got them from Office Max or wherever we did. So it's like a triptych, and we didn't tell them. All we said was, what are your hopes for your family for the future? That's all we said. And nobody needed any further explanation after that. And they drew these amazing pieces, and they worked the rest of the morning on them together as a family. And it was so sweet to see because it was exactly the motion that I had wanted to see. I wanted to see co-creation, familial working out and conversation and watching how decisions were made. And so I had 2 grad students with me who were taking notes throughout this whole process, and we use those notes also for data collection. Then we took a break. We had lunch, and we purchased lunch for everybody, and we chose a local vendor, someone from the community, and if we could find someone who was from Puerto Rico as well, we tried to keep it all very, also, oh my gosh, the food is so good. It's so good. So it's because I wanted to eat really good Puerto Rican food. That's the main reason. No. So we had some really good food together, and we talked, and we just relaxed together. And then in the afternoon, we moved a little bit. So if we were in one room, we tried to transform the space a little. So we moved to one side, or if we could move to a different room. We were in a church here, so we could move to a different room. And each family had to discuss their triptych. And then Daniel, my colleague, he led the multifamily focus group sessions where we had our interview schedule. And then he would ask questions based on the resilience theory, Walsh's resilience theory, but from this multifamily aspect. And this was really important that we did this, because some of the stories, there's no way we would have gotten it if we hadn't used art. There's just no way. If you sit down with someone and you say, tell me this thing about your family, like it was clear no one would say anything. But after this kinetic and, sensual experience they had, the stories really flowed. So I want to talk a little bit about the results. So families were given the opportunity first to describe their trifolds and to express their own words, the significance of what they had done. So one woman said, first, the center part of the triptych is the heart and the symbol of the home, which represents the stability as a family. Someone else said, the house for us represents unity and all the goals that we can reach, that we have overcome upon arriving here. The sun for me represents every day, every new dawn that we are here. I like these two quotes because I wanted to impart upon you all that these were very sensual descriptions. Like, you could tell they were very personal, very honest, talking about the heart as the center, or talking about the sun as a way of unifying these families. And this data was so rich in this way. It was really quite a gift that they were able to share this with us. So we went on to examine Walsh's theory, and we looked at these particular processes, and here's how they manifested within the data. So there are belief systems, communication processes, and organizational processes. So belief systems. In our case, I include the Spanish here, but I recognize not everyone can read it, so I'll just do English for time. In our case, we did not have physical losses, but work, economic stability, and that's why we moved. Looking for the best education, looking for economic stability for our home, to be able to give them, their children, a better future. I think that is what drives our desire for hope, is that see them, she pointed to their children, to see them mature, see them grow. Because for one as an adult, change is not easy, but one can manage a little better, and one fights for the family wherever that may be. But always, when you are a parent, the concern of one is no longer yours. It is for them. And that is what motivates us, and that is what drives us, their future. So this is definitely something that we have seen in the literature with Latino families, is that one of their core belief systems is rooted and manifests in the family success, that it is a unit, and that children are really seen as the sort of, that's the tell, that's how they know, right? That if your children are able to go to school, if they're able to be safe, if they're able to flourish, and this is very prominent, and certainly in the immigration literature, but also for Latinos. The second one is communication processes, which Walsh describes as open emotional sharing, or being able to share a range of feelings. So here's the quote: establishing ourselves here with the heart still over there, that has been the most painful, mostly for me as an adult, that after the move I became so sick with stress to the point that I felt I was dying. But it was a process of loss. I had to cry, and we had to scream, and I had to feel the pain and let it go. So now I can look and say, after a year, yes, I see myself with hope. Yes, I see myself with the desire to settle here, that economically we are fighting. My husband and I, yes, we are more established here, and with the desire to maintain ourselves. It has been a very difficult, but after a year, we can see that future. I want to say this emotional sharing and sharing a range of feelings. This is just one quote, but there was a lot of these types of quotes, and I don't have time to present more, but the ability for these groups to openly share their range of feelings. And here, it was so raw. When she delivered the speech, she was very raw, very honest, very open, and everyone was present. Like you could feel it in the room when she was crying, and she's just saying it was a horrible year. But the important thing here is she was able to name it. Like she was able to say it, she was able to communicate it, and she was able to communicate it within her family. And that as a family, through that recognition, through that sharing of the range of feelings, they are able to come out so that now this is a great quote for this, because it's a brilliant quote, because it really starts out with like, here's the hurt, this is the thing that happened. And then this is the emotional range the family experienced together. But because they were so resilient, they're able to come out on the other side together. It wasn't a process of being overwhelmed and it destroying a family, these types of emotions, or the range, or the rawness of it. In fact, quite the opposite. It ended up being something that they were able to really pull together. And now on the other side, you could even see this couple in the room with their kids. They were very strong because they had survived this together. Finally, organizational patterns, which Walsh describes as the flexibility or capacity to change and rebound and reorganize, or to adapt. I always, if someone made the decision to move, would first suggest that you have to be in agreement with your family, and that's the basis for making a decision like this, because the support that we all give to each other is within that nucleus. It is fundamental for us to be able to establish or make the decision to return. That has been the basis of our core. It does not mean that we have not cried. It does not mean that we have not had times of need. When we decided to move, it was the difficult holiday season. It was November, and the holidays are very emotional times for us. I think it was the worst time for that decision to occur to a person, because that's the time to stay together as a family, and you can't just return. The most difficult was Christmas, because my spouse and I didn't have any money, not even to buy a candy. What money we had was to help us rebuild our lives, and that was the most difficult moment. But we all gathered together as a family and got on the same page to assess our situation. We're not going to buy gifts, but we are making a new home, and we have each other. And it doesn't matter where we are. This is such a great quote. It doesn't matter where we are. We will work together to do what we need to do and have fun, and that depends on how we support each other. That, I think, is the best way to live as a family. So this really, like, in terms of the richness of the Latino experience, undergirding the Walsh, this Walsh paradigm, which hadn't really been applied. I hadn't seen too much of it applied to Latino families. This is just incredibly, and lots of families had this is just one of the best quotes, and where she starts from, like, it's always a family decision, to being tested within one of the traditional aspects of families, spending holidays together. And so she then invokes this particular event, which a lot of us are familiar with, like Christmas, right? Which is one where this is a time when families consolidate. I mean, unless you're watching a holiday movie and people are angry and yelling at each other, but theoretically, you're together and you're in your family nucleus and you're celebrating the event with each other and giving gifts, and it's a way to strengthen the family. So she talked about it in terms of a potential moment that would tear apart the family, because none of the traditions were available to them. But they rebounded and reorganized and adapted and reimagined that event as one of strength and rebuilding and forward future thinking to be successful and resilient. So this is really quite a powerful moment, both for their family, but also in terms of the richness of this data. So some conclusions and implications. So I do think it was a big risk. I do think we got really great data, and it did demonstrate to me that Latino families should be viewed through this, instead of a deficit framework, that they should be viewed through a family resilience strength-based model, one that's based on these particular processes, which are very distinct: belief systems, organizational patterns, and communication processes. And Latinos show that through their emphasis on their children's future success, relying on the family as an organizational structure, the space, right, the particular geographical moments, that are linked with these sensual, deep emotions, heart, home, love, right? And through the open ability to express emotional processes, their depression and their perseverance, you can see how this model is really quite useful. So a couple implications. One is methodological. I do think that on the other, coming out of this risky thing, I do think that arts-based inquiry is a very useful tool for looking at this particular difficult thing, which is the unit of analysis being a collective, right? Not the unit of analysis being the individual, but really, what do we mean when we say family? It's very difficult to capture that. And then secondly, I think in terms of healthcare delivery and outcomes and social service delivery, that Latino interventions, in order to improve and strengthen resilience, they should focus on strength-based techniques, family unit-based techniques with regards to emotionality, belief systems, and organizational structures as collective functioning. That familial collective identity, intervention, and policy should be prioritized. And I think that this research is really showing it quite dramatically and very, openly. And I do want to say a little quick note on the method, because sometimes I get asked this question. I am not a therapist. My degree is in sociology. I'm not even good at that kind of stuff. People don't come to me when they have problems. So I do want to say this was not meant to be like a therapy session, and it wasn't meant to be something that would help, our research subjects. However, though we did not intentionally do this, every single participant, including our community partners, all described this approach as healing, as wonderful, and a powerful way to break the barriers of some of the difficulty of these issues and to open up and have open and honest and heartfelt discussions. And I don't think that would have been possible had we chosen just traditional qualitative or quantitative methods. I really do think that embedding it within these liberatory practices that have always been at the heart of art, I think in some very fundamental way, right? Because art is at the heart sensual. It's a sensual experience. Art is, it is what we see, it is what we hear, it is what we feel, it's what we can perceive. And from the eye to their heart, they're able to explore their lived experience. All right, so next steps. We did have a lot of success. We've got papers out and we presented at conferences and we've gotten some pretty good feedback and some criticisms. And we did receive a nice chunk of money to replicate this study in Puerto Rico. And we were going to go in March. We were supposed to leave in March. And then COVID. So we were told by the university they're not, as those of you who probably do international research or anything outside the United States, or even in the United States, we are not allowed to go do anything. So we've been in this holding pattern, and we ended up issuing several reports to our community partners in Florida, who also, they go back and forth from Puerto Rico, and they're anytime they're ready for us. So we're waiting on clearance from the university. But also another concern, I was talking with the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies yesterday about this. We don't know what the impact of COVID is going to be like on these very vulnerable communities, especially internationally. And we don't know how they're getting the vaccine, if they're getting the vaccine, and what the extent of multiple levels of marginalizations and trauma have done. And so as a researcher, it's something I'm grappling with and haven't quite figured out yet, to be honest with you. How is this something that would be adding more fuel to the fire? All right. So is this something that would be dangerous or hurtful to the communities? And should we wait a few more years? And if we wait, we're going to lose our funding. So I don't have any answers for that particular dilemma, but it is something that I'm thinking about in terms of not wanting to cause harm, but wanting to get this research out, so for the potential of it. I think that's it. Thank you. I'm going to stop the share.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pilar.
Well, at this point, we'd like to maybe move from here to the top of the hour with questions and discussion. If there are questions, if you have one, or please either put it in the Q&A, the webinar Q&A, or in the chat, and I can go ahead and read them out. While you're thinking about what your question might be, maybe I'll go ahead and kick it off with a question of my own, if that's all right. I'm really interested in how you're using art as a research methodology here, and so just to make sure I understand, you have there are 9 families total in 3 groups of 3.
3 a day.
Is that right?
It was the most we could accommodate in a day, given the space. We wanted to have originally 6, but no one could accommodate it. We just couldn't accommodate it. But there wasn't space, so we had to reduce it to 3.
I see.
Three a day over 3 days.
And so the specific, were there enough data for you to leave the sessions overall with specific insights into the processes that supported resilience in these cases? I mean, I feel like I can imagine, just based on the quotes that you gave, how powerful these sessions were. Was there enough? Did you feel like there were enough interactions to support any kind of generalization across this with respect to the?
So in any type of qualitative work, we can generalize. We never use the term generalizability. It's not possible in qualitative work unless you're doing Strauss and Corbin's positivistic grounded theory pre-Kathy Sharma's, that kind of stuff. But that does exist. But grounded theory post Kathy Sharma's and epistemologically on the post-constructivist side, you can't generalize. So what you can do is sort of begin to create mid-level theory or debunk certain theory, sort of to add a little bit. But to speak to that question about generalizability, which is a really good question, we ended up working with someone over at CSTAT, because my question was, is it possible to get some of what we're seeing here into a quantitative way so we can do some of that, that type of work. Right. So what was difficult is, how do you measure family as the unit of analysis? That's the question, right? So we were able to get the variables from the qualitative work, and then, so we have it all, but then so how do you measure it? So we've been messing around with that a little bit, and we did collect the data, but someone made a very key mistake, and so we don't know what to do now with it. But we were going to measure it 2 ways to test it. One was head of household, which is the way it's always done in all the literature. And then we created another quantitative measure that was every single person in the family took the survey at the same time, and then those were aggregated at a family unit. So then we were going to compare this data point as family, which was all of the families, with the single head of household. And then we were going to compare those to see, are we capturing the same thing, or is there something specifically useful about looking at family from this this other level thing. So that was the intention. And the reason why I can't present on it is because the person who collected the data, this is why you need more money. This is why you got to go down. You need more money so you can go down and collect the data, especially with experimental stuff like this, because they didn't differentiate between head of household and family unit.
Right.
So it's just all data. So we just have tons of data with that differentiation not occurring. So that was when we go back down to Puerto Rico, that's a big issue. I want to make sure that we capture that and see if we can still do that level of analysis. But it was so frustrating. It was really, really frustrating. And now I know why people do pilot work, because you find these mistakes versus getting a big grant and then having nothing and spending all this money and time. So that's where we're going with that.
Just a follow-up. So you mentioned that I think that you were going to go to Puerto Rico to, I think you said replicate the
Yeah.
study.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of what was in my mind when I was asking my question about generalizability or specific issues. Like, what did you, if you're thinking about replicating it, were there things like results or findings or conclusions of a qualitative sort that you were
Oh yeah. Well,
thinking
the thing
might find
is
around?
like we were studying transnational identity. If we go down to Puerto Rico, they're not transnational identity.
Right.
They're living there.
Right.
And so is there anything, so I wanted to look at these three resilience factors that Walsh laid out, the belief systems and the communicate process. And then I wanted to look at how those operationalize those there and then see if they're exactly the same or different, or is there something that's different that then we can say, look, transnational migrants experience this and they prioritize these things versus home, you see what I mean? Versus home ones, and then they prioritize them in this way.
Right.
So we're really trying to tease out what does transnational identity, what is that impact? Like versus just like there's just this narrative that there's two narratives fundamentally about immigrants. There's a lot, but there's fundamentally two. One, they're lazy and they're sucking us dry and they're illegal, and and then the other one is they're hardworking and they're providing the economy, and it unfortunately usually falls on political lines, and it's both. It's very difficult. I think it's just that particular conception is just used as a weapon to either silence people or to get people to vote for you. But it's not ever considered really thoughtfully. So it's really difficult, really, really hard to do this. So I was hoping to get some insight into that.
Thank you. That sounds really interesting. I mean, are you going to have a chance to do this at some point? Are you going to? Is it just it can get kicked down the road a little bit? So you'll do it maybe next semester or next year?
Yeah, so I told Daniel I was hoping to do it this summer, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're at that stage. So we're hoping where the next plan, I said, let's do it in December. And I said, maybe we could get some play because we offer a lot of money to the parents, to the families. We give them $300 as an incentive for their time for the day. And I was very, very intentional about that money because it takes a lot to get. You're asking people to spend time out of the day. Sometimes they were not going to work. I mean, they weren't at a 9-to-5 job. They're doing like whatever day work they have. But still, it was asking people to take a full day off. And so I wanted to compensate the family. Right. So I was thinking, let's go right before Christmas. If we go in December, then maybe people we could, it could be like, we need money for Christmas.
That's smart.
And make it like a double thing.
So I have a question from one of our attendees. This is from Edgar Cardenas, who's a research associate in the Center for Interdisciplinary. And somebody, honestly, you should meet and talk to. From Edgar, were you coding the data you were getting? I'm thinking about ways to make interrelator reliability more robust.
So IRR is really hard to do, obviously, and we all had the data, and then the first round, I was like, just code just code with your training. So everyone went away, and there were 4 of us, and we all coded. Then we met as a group, and we came up with, we had a 2-hour discussion about what code did you find and how are you defining it, right? So what's your code? What's the code memo? And then we put on the board, here's the code, and here's how we're defining it. And then we refined our code book so that we came out with a set that everyone had. Then everyone went back and recoded using that joint. And then I did 2 IRRs. And the first one came out at 42%, which I thought was pretty low. So we got together again, and I'm like, this is pretty low. Can we make it better? So we talked about, and some of the differences were not, I mean, it's just hard to do IRR, right? It's just hard because it's like some people were picking up half the sentence or a whole sentence. So we had to say, no, this is the parameters for coding. And, it's very difficult. So we redid it. And then our IRR came back at 62%. And then I was just like, I'm just going to be comfortable with that. And that because I'm not doing this again. But also it was high enough for me to feel comfortable. And also
Right.
to know that if there was any differences that they could get reconciled out at the paper stage. So I landed, that's how I landed. But I mean, if anybody has any suggestions, I find IRR with qualitative work incredibly challenging,
And
but useful.
we've done quite a bit of that work in our research as well. And the
It's time
IRRs are,
consuming.
it's very, very
Hours.
time consuming.
Very time. I
And
don't.
most of the trustworthiness that induces into the analysis is really through in the reconciliation phase, I think.
Yes,
I mean,
I
because
do. Yeah,
the initial IRRs, yeah. So
they're
that
low.
a second question from Edgar, on a photo voice perspective, with COVID, would you be able to use cell phones for pictures, making to get perspectives from multiple family members? I think Edgar's used photo voice before as
I've not used photo voice, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't use
Okay.
photo voice. I've always wanted to, and people tell me you can. I just, I had this. My husband's a photographer, and so his vision is just like, it's spectacular. He's an artist, and he does these but there's definitely a viewpoint, and it was just a methodological decision. It was a philosophical thing I wrestled with, but I landed on, I don't want photo voice. I want something that captures more collective rather than less collective. So that's why I made that choice. I don't have anything against photo voice. I think it's great, and I hope to use it one day. But it was just because I really wanted to focus on the collective, the family, the unit as the unit of analysis. That's why I made that choice.
Yeah, I think as I understand the question, it's intended to kind of suggest that maybe using cell phones from each person might be a way of introducing.
Oh, you mean to get that data in during a COVID time?
Yeah, right. Like and then.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah. Again,
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I will. Yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that because I'm so stuck. Because I'm rigid.
Yeah,
especially
right.
since you can't. Yeah, that's a great idea. Let me think about that. I mean, I'd have to think about it because I made that philosophical move and I was so set on it. But COVID's destroying everything. So maybe it could destroy my rigidity. But no, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll think about that.
I'm going to put you in touch with Edgar after this.
Yeah,
session.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another.
Edgar, are you just going to design it for me? We should get together. Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. I need help because I don't know. Seems like you know what you're doing.
All right. Are there any other questions from attendees? One thing I wanted to, we'll give people a chance to, a couple of minutes to write a question if they have one in the chat or in the Q&A. But I'm really interested in this commitment to the collective that you emphasized. And I think there's a connection between that kind of commitment and the kind of commitment we make in our own work in the center. And I'm curious, how did the collaborative sort of co-creation that you emphasized, did that figure into kind of your analysis? I mean, were you looking at like the ways in which people, like families, came together in the morning session, right, to produce the art that they were producing? Like what parts were individualized? Were some families maybe were more collective and maybe some were a little bit more?
Yes.
More
yeah, that's a really good question, and my colleague is working on that paper. But the analysis of how the pieces were created and then the discussion afterwards were very interesting because you could see, although they all, like, I was only talking about resilience, but if you're talking about how particular families work out those decision-making processes, whoa, it was powerful. And you could really see matriarchal lines emerging and patriarchal lines emerging, and then there was a difference between the age of the children as well. Like older children who were openly bilingual were more directive. Do you know what I mean? Of like the process. And then, I mean, and then some just sort of refused to do it. It was interesting. They did it, but like they refused to engage it. So I had to work a little bit like one guy just wrote words. So he didn't draw anything. And he was just like in his little corner like this on just writing words while his child and wife or partner were like creating these fluffy things. And, so at one point, I just kind of walked over there and you guys, oh, are you working on this together? And then the mother was like, he, blah, 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 so some of it it's way more complicated. But yeah, I think in terms of how the pieces are co-created, there's a lot there, but I'm not, that wasn't for this presentation, but yeah, that was definitely in there and fascinating. I mean, I find group work fascinating, decision-making process, especially with families when you're talking about parenting and creation of something and managing those identities. That could be a whole, I think people study this, right? Or for HDFS, that's the thing.
We've hit the top of the hour and I want to respect everyone's time.
Thank
you, Dr. Horner, very much for your presentation. It was
Thank
very
you.
thought-provoking and interesting. We hope that,
Thank you.
we hope that if you have an opportunity to join us in a couple of weeks, you will. I see Dr. White is on a part of the session, so we're really excited to join the University Interdisciplinary Colloquium on the 12th of February when she will be presenting. All right, again, Dr. Horner, thank you so much.